The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone, so we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
Hello, welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a new episode in Season 6. There's something about Mary, Queen of Scots. Today we're going to be talking about Mary, Queen of Scots' mother, Marie de Guise. And because this is a family that I know a little bit about, not a lot about, I mostly just researched Marie herself, we have a special guest who is Lana Wood Johnson, who was last on this podcast for the Empress Sisi episode, because she knows all about the de Guise family, and she's here with a lot of context and just really explaining the context of this family is so important to get. Like, we're going to get to Mary Queen of Scots eventually in this journey of a season. But, you know, before we were talking about Margaret Tudor and kind of we're explaining what Mary Queen of Scots' claim to the throne eventually is going to be, to the throne of England. But also she inherits from Margaret Tudor maybe a bit of what all the Tudor people seem to have, which is just like a really disastrous instinct for choosing romantic partners. But Mary Queen of Scots, as we're going to talk about it in this episode, was very much the product of her mother's French family, and we're going to explain why in this episode. So enjoy this episode of Vulgar History with special guest star Lana Wood Johnson. Okay, so we're joined today by friend of the podcast, Lana Wood Johnson. Lana, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for, having me come and talk about my nerds.
Here's the thing. So this is, it was kind of a no-brainer to me to invite you on this episode because this is a part of history that you have kind of taught me. And it's Mary Queen of Scots. So this is the Mary Queen of Scots season. There's something about Mary Queen of Scots. And today we're talking about her mother, Marie de Guise, who is a member of the de Guise family, and that's what you know a lot about, Lana.
They're terrible people. Of course, I know a lot about them.
The de Guises, yeah. So it's actually, we were just comparing notes, but like what I've prepared is stuff about Marie herself, and what you just inherently know in your bones is like her dirtbag brothers. So we're going to give you a whole picture of the whole de Guise situation.
And Marie's mom, Mary's grandma, Antoinette, because she's problematic, but she didn't have anything interesting happen to her other than being awesome.
That's the thing. So actually, yeah, because when we were first playing the season, you suggested I could do an episode about Antoinette. It's Antoinette of Bourbon, right?
Yep.
Bourbon.
Yeah.
Bourbon. Anyway, you suggested that, and I was reading about her, and I was just like, this is like interesting, but also it's not an episode because she just did very well. She accomplished everything. There's not really any tension in her story because she just like achieved everything.
She's a princess. She married an influential family. They became more influential under her. She did a very good job at everything she did. And everyone that she raised is a terrible, scheming person. And I love them to bits. Except for Marie. But that's why she's the least I know.
Yeah, I don't know. She just like, I don't know. It's so, if you could explain a bit. I mean, if we start from there, like if we kind of explain who Marie de Guise is based on who her, like genetically, but also just like as a role model, like kind of like the last time we were talking about Margaret Tudor, and she grew up seeing Margaret Beaufort, Elizabeth Woodville. Like she grew up seeing women in positions of power who were respected and got shit done. So like just seeing that kind of sets you up to be like, okay, I can also be like that. And Marie de Guise, I think, saw that. It's her grandmother, right? Antoinette?
Antoinette is Marie's mother, Mary's grandmother.
Right. Okay, yeah. So Marie de Guise, her mother, Antoinette de Bourbon. Can you explain about Antoinette's whole thing?
Antoinette was a Bourbon, which means that she's actually like blood princess, not princess, but like, okay, France is weird. I'm also going to, I want to go on record as saying, I took 6 weeks of French in high school or in junior high. And it was the only class I ever cheated in my entire life. So my pronunciation is going to be horrible. But it's the best I can do with, the teachers that I had.
Well, here's the thing. My French pronunciation is impeccable. So between us.
But you're Canadian.
I speak with a Quebecois accent. So
we're going to do the best we can with what we've got. But that doesn't diminish our love for them. So, okay. So she was there's kind of three kinds of prince in France at this time. There's prince of the blood, the royal family, which is like actually genuinely completely prince and princesses. Like they're the kings, they're the king's kids, they're the male line grandchildren, kind of like what England is now. And then there's princes du sang, which is princes of the royal blood, which means they're legitimately descended from the male line of descent of French kings. So the Conde, and the Bourbons, but the Bourbons get complicated. And then there's, Prince du sang. So that's the Conde, the Montpensier. So, and then there's the princes légitimes, which is legitimated princes, which are male line of descent from the king's other children, the bonus kids, that they just had extras in case. And so her family is Bourbon of the Prince du sang, which is princes of the royal blood, which means they're not the main line. But that doesn't stop them from eventually being the main line with Henry of Navarre, which Anne knows very well from Queen Margot. That's her great nephew. So that's her family. And then she marries Claude Duc de Guise. And Claude is like the second or third son of the Duchy of Lorraine. And now this is where my favorite part comes in, the Holy Roman Empire, because Lorraine is not in France yet. Lorraine is in France now. But at that time, he was not a French citizen, but he was buddies with the King of France, and the King of France gave him a dukedom in France. So he is a new kind of prince, which is called a prince étranger. I'm guessing that one's terrible, but it's like a foreign prince. So basically, he's noble because he's from a noble family that isn't a French noble family. He's from a noble Holy Roman Empire family, which is like as powerful as you can get without actually being a member of the royal family and by marriage or not marriage. And basically, Antoinette married Claude, who was the first Duc de Guise of the Lorraine branch of Duc de Guise, which means that they're starting their own dynasty. They have influence, they have friendships, but like this is the family. Like this is the beginning of this de Guise family. It ends in a couple more generations, but like not without like spreading out very, very well. Antoinette was like really smart. She was genuinely good at everything she did. She outlived all but one of her children, and that child was the one that went off to become an abbess at Reims. She had a ridiculous number of children, and
Yeah, like 15 or something.
most all of them made it to adulthood. I think she only had 2 that died in early childhood, and the rest of them like did things. And we will talk about the children that did things, but like two of them became cardinals, 2 of them became abbesses. One was a grand prior. 2 of them were dukes in their own right. No, 3 of them were dukes in their own right, but one of them was also the cardinal. And then there was a marquis, and the marquis will continue popping up as Anne continues to talk about Marie. I have no doubt.
I'm just cutting. There's 12. She had 12 children.
12 children, yeah. And lots of them were boys, so only like 4 girls. And the rest are problematic. 4 girls that made it to adulthood, 2 that died, so we're down to 10. And then we have 4 girls. We're talking about the main one. So now we're down to 6. So there's 6 boys.
Yeah. And so what you're describing as well, like this makes sense to me because we're going to, this like place setting is very important, but we're going to get to a point where the King of Scotland, spoiler, is like, I need a wife. And the fact that he chooses her, it's like, she's not the daughter of the king, but she like might as well be in terms of prestige and importance.
Yeah, like she's the daughter of the buddy of the king, and she's related by marriage, but related by blood to the kings. She's related by blood to part of the Holy Roman Empire. So like there's a ranking member of the Holy Roman Empire. The Duchy of Lorraine was very powerful and influential. It kind of, which is why France and Germany have kind of been fighting out about it since even before they were France and Germany.
Well, this is another thing that I just want to also mention. So, like the last Mary Queen of Scots episode we did was about Margaret Tudor, and that's where I was talking about, England and Scotland, and I was focusing a lot on them. But like France is there on the periphery. Like this is all of these countries are alternately allying and being at war with each other, and the same thing is happening on like continental Europe. So there's a lot of like when we talk about like these marriages are for alliance reasons, it's like, yeah, because it's like, oh, let's like make these countries be not at war for 5 minutes by marrying these people to each other. And then they're at war again. Like this is just, there's so many countries involved. And this is why the Mary Queen of Scots season is as many episodes as it's going to be, because there's a lot of players here. France being a huge one.
Well, and one of the things, as I mentioned to you, Anne, my husband and I stayed up late one night as I explained Germany to him because he dared question me in my own home. The concept of a nation state, the concept of like this ethnic nation state that we see Europe as right now is very, very new. Mm-hmm. It's younger than America. around the time of America was when it was starting to formulate, but like it was kind of this varying groups of power and influence. And even during this time, Burgundy was part of France and then became not part of France, and became part, like officially part of England for a little bit. And then they got it back. And then like what we think of as England, what we think of as France, what we think of as Germany, those were not things. They didn't exist. It was these duchies and how they aligned with which kings. And the kings got their power from having powerful duchies on their side.
And that's part of where I get really confused and kind of give up trying to. And this is why you're on the episode today.
This is my favorite part.
Oh my gosh. All these, because it's, anyway, all these little parts of like what I now think of as France, but like back then was like really crucially not France. They were a bunch of little places who allied with other countries. And anyway, yeah. So
like Lorraine is the Lorraine of the time is the last real strong bits of the third kingdom of Charlemagne. So Charlemagne, when he died, split his country between his three kids, and one side became what we mostly know as Germany, at the time was the Holy Roman Empire, and they like elected their emperors. And then one side became the parts of France that weren't Eleanor of Aquitaine's and Burgundy, but like the rest of France. And then the middle parts were Lothair stuff, and that became Lorraine. And it's now Belgium and the Netherlands and all of that. But like this is an old, powerful country in its own right that's currently allied with the Holy Roman Empire, and France likes it. So that's why the de Guises have so much power, is because they're both domestically important through Antoinette and foreign important through their connections with Lorraine.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No.
Going deep.
This is why you're here. So Antoinette de Bourbon is this, again, like she's just an impressive person. She just like she had this power position. She had this good marriage. She had all these children. The children mostly survived, and she was just like thriving. Like she just, which again, it's like a great way to be, but not a person I can do a 45-minute episode about, because she just did well for herself. She's just doing well.
Yeah.
And then Marie is her oldest child. That's her firstborn.
Yes, correct.
I'm just going to refer to my notes. So, actually, can you talk about the Holy Roman Empire again for a minute? I just need to open another document. Just vamp one.
Yes. I mean, you know me, I can literally just sit and talk about the Holy Roman Empire forever. But to talk about Antoinette, like why she was so good at what she did, that's the thing that I'm ready for that one. She was an administrator. Like back in the day, we have this impression nowadays that like women have never been about money, that the men were about money. But back at this time, the women were the ones that if you have a strong wife that can organize things really well, you have a really strong holding. Because the men were off fighting wars. They were fighting every war they could possibly get into in order to keep, maintain, or grow their territory. So Antoinette was like really, really good at managing the household, managing their finances, despite a husband that was like literally always at war and way too many children, in a brand new duchy, basically.
Well, and this is like a thing, like it's a phrase that I've come across a lot when I'm talking about like, this is the education that so-and-so received. It's like how to run a household. And it's not just like how to teach your maids how to dust the windowsills. It means like doing the, like exactly what you're saying. It's administrative work. It's like paperwork. Like that is like you were being a household manager effectively.
More than a household. Like when we say household now, we think of our homes.
True.
When her household was like, she was a property manager. She was a real estate person. She was making sure that the taxes got collected. Like she was funding a country. She was funding the equivalent of like, she was basically a state governor in a lot of different ways. Like there were people that were doing the administrative tasks, but she was like the person that was making sure everybody got the money they needed, that the money was flowing to them correctly, that everybody, like all of the stuff was handled and nobody had to think about it. because when things got chaotic, you didn't have enough money to be a knight. It took hundreds of people to keep one knight in the field, let alone your own like private company. And that's what this guy was running. So she was funding a national guard and administering their lands and estates. So she like being good at that, and then also having time to be super schemy, but like not like through her children, and hardline Catholic, like ultra Catholic is the term to describe this woman to this day. And at the time, even in France during this period, she was extraordinarily Catholic.
Yeah.
And that comes through in her children.
Yeah. Well, and
except for Marie.
But this is a whole thing about, so like you were describing about, there's all these little duchies and like there's all these different places and everyone's allying with different places through marriage and treaties and whatever. But there's also, this is the era of like where Protestantism starts getting more of a foothold in more places. And then that becomes another element that's involved in like which countries ally with which other countries. Because it's like, well, we can only ally with a Catholic country. Like
it kind of went both ways. Like you would, at one point, the de Guises were considering becoming Lutheran because it would be more powerful for them. So it wasn't really about like personal faith in a lot of ways. At these levels, at these noble levels, faith, it was less about faith and more about politics of who you aligned with and how. And they were never going to be Huguenot because that was not. they were truly at war with all Huguenots for all time. But like considering moving to Lutheranism, considering moving to like being ultra Catholic and literally having 2 cardinals in the family, like it was as much political as it was, more than it was any sort of like idea of faith.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the document. What I wanted to bring up was just, it's my timeline of like who I've talked about on the podcast, and just so I could put this in a place and time. So Marie de Guise was born in 1515. So that's decades after Margaret Tudor. This is because she's going to marry Margaret Tudor's son. Anyway, so this is like the next generation. So other people who were born at circa around the same time, it's all like this is in parallel to what people think about as like the Tudor era in England. Because, so Marie de Guise was born in 1515. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's final wife, was also born. Henry VIII is going to be a character in this story. She was born in 1512. Frances Grey, who was the daughter of Mary Tudor, she was born in 1517. Like Anne Askew was born in 1521. Oh, Frances Grey from the movie Lady Jane. Anyway, it's just like all these people. So it's like she's being born at around the same time as numerous people who you think of as like, oh, the people of Tudor. So like those are her peers. That's who, like, not necessarily that she knew them, but that's who was around at the same time. Like this is the era that we're looking at. I don't really have anyone that we've covered on the podcast from other countries who was born around the same time. The closest would be Doña Gracia Nasi, was born in 1510. So just in terms of, religious stuff. So that's, when the Jews were being persecuted heavily. One of the times, this is the time that that Doña Gracia
at all.
No. But this is what Doña Gracia Nasi, her family fled Spain from Portugal. That was all happening at the same time. And that's like, because Ferdinand and Isabella, and then her daughter is Catherine of Aragon, who married Henry VIII. Like we're firmly in like Henry VIII era. All the people who are tangentially related to his story are all kind of being born and or running around when she was born. So 1515. Let's see. So Antoinette, this is her first child. Marie came swiftly. They had planned for the baby to be delivered in a certain place, but then the baby came so quickly that in fact Marie was born in a random peasant's house because they were en route from one house to another house. So I like to think, I like when there's an exciting birth story, like Njinga had an exciting birth story. So it's just like when someone is born so dramatically, it's like, oh, this is going to be a person who is an interesting person. Anyway, yes. So she's born. And then, all these other siblings were born in quick succession as well. And Marie was sent off to be raised in a convent with her grandmother, Philippa, who was a nun. Do you know anything about her grandmother, Philippa? I guess that's Antoinette's mom.
Let me look. I did not go deep on Philippa, but being raised by your grandmother is pretty normal in this family, it looks like. No, I don't know much about Philippa other than, let me see. Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know. I
No,
just find
Philippa's on the other side. I think Philippa's on the other side. I think she's
on the de Guise
Claude.
side. Yeah.
Yeah, she's Philippa of Guelders. So she was the Duchess Consort of Lorraine. So she became a nun after her husband died, which is that's kind of a normal thing to do sometimes if you're not schemy, um, and like to be in charge of things.
Exactly. We've seen in some other stories. So it's like her grandmother is a nun, but like it's she's not like a nun who had a bunch of babies. It's like she lived her life, her husband died, and then she like in her retirement years became a nun. So Marie was being raised around nuns, but not to be a nun because she was the oldest daughter of this family. And so like they knew that her marriage was going to be an important sort of like pawn related thing. Anyway, but what's I think key here is that she was growing up around nuns, not growing up at royal court. So she's going to have those skills, which we're going to see, but she also got a good head on her shoulders. She got a good education. And again, being raised around like women who knew how to do stuff and like seeing that as just, okay, this is how things are. Women can be whatever.
Well, nuns were also administering estates. Like they were managing things.
Yeah.
It was one of the few occupations women were allowed to have that actually were occupations. Like we like to pretend that you go to a nunnery and then you just sit and pray all day and cry a lot. But like they were managing estates. They were landholders in their own right in a lot of ways.
So she's picking up a lot of, like, we're really hammering this home, but it's like important for what she does later to know that Marie de Guise was taught and observed women having the skills of like running shit. Like she
making decisions.
Yeah, exactly. So when she was 14, two of her uncles came to visit Philippa at the convent, but also just to kind of like see like, hey, how is Marie doing? Like now she's 14. They're kind of maybe thinking like, let's see what's she about? What how can we marry her off, or like what's she like? And they came and saw her and they were excited to see that she was very beautiful. Well, I want to say, like, I mentioned this when I was in podcasts, but it's like people record what other people look like. And Marie was very tall. Her daughter also very, like Marie was like, I think she's like 6 feet tall. Like she's like tall for a woman for today. So she stands out. And I don't want to be like dismissive. But I think like when you're 6 feet tall and you're very poised and you're very smart and you're very charismatic, it's like whether you're beautiful or not, like you stand out. And they were just like, oh, this is like a Cinderella situation. Like they're coming to this convent. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Our niece is like Elizabeth Debicki. Like, oh, well, like maybe we can be even more ambitious about her. Anyway, so they were like, okay, here's what's happening. We're going to send her to royal court because she's like so impressive, like both in her like intelligence and her charm, but also just like she's 6 feet tall and very cool. And so they're like, well, this is going to help us convince someone really important to marry her. And so she shipped off from the convent to hang out with the French royal family and their courtiers. And everybody met her there and they all really liked her. And this is the thing that kind of happens to her in a couple different circumstances. Like, I think her social skills were good. Like, I think she was just charming. She was interesting. Like, people just liked her. She had the sort of personality. And also, you know, I don't know, like you could be 6 feet tall and I don't know. It's not like a Princess Diana thing where she was like tall, but initially she was so shy. Like, I think Marie was very tall and confident. So of course she like people take attention. And also they knew who her parents were.
Yes.
They knew who her parents were. And she was Elizabeth Debicki and she was smart and she was interesting. So like she had the whole package. And she became really good friends with the king's daughters, the princesses Marguerite and Madeleine. And so they became sort of a trio. But it's really like they're all similar age, but they're also, no one else is at that same stature of like importance. So.
And their dads were friends.
Their dads are friends and they became friends. But also this is all good news for Marie and like her marriage prospects, because that's what her uncles are thinking about. It's like the more impressive she is, the more impressive a husband they're going to be able to get for her.
This is a theme.
This is a theme. And what I am trying to do with this season is, like last time I was talking about Margaret Tudor, and that that's sort of like a foreshadowing of just like the asshole Scottish lords. What's it like coming as an outsider into Scottish court? But also Margaret Tudor and kind of her whole situation. Like she's got that Tudor trademark, just like disaster love life. And that becomes a part of what happens with Mary Queen of Scots. But from the French side, what Mary Queen of Scots is getting from her mother and what I think we'll see from Marie de Guise is just like this really, she gets it. Like she's smart. Like she...
They can always see the angle.
Yeah, she's really smart, but also like this whole French angle. Like when you see how Marie de Guise does so well in French court, we're going to see later how does she do at Scottish court differently. But like what skill set makes you thrive in the French royal court are not skills that make you thrive elsewhere necessarily.
Especially not the Scottish court. But having French back, of the French had, like the de Guises in particular, had ideas. Like they were not happy just being small dukedoms. Like they were going to take over the whole world.
And that's the thing. Yeah.
Like that, Marie was part of that. She was different from all the rest of her family, but she was part of that. And her role in that was Scotland, but not at this point. At this point, her role in that was get us more power. And she was like, okay, cool, down.
Yeah. She's just like, I think they lucked out, frankly, that like their eldest niece, Marie, when they were so ambitious, like that she was so exactly, like genuinely, like she wasn't pretending, I don't think. Like she was just genuinely exactly the sort of young woman you want to be sending to royal court at this time because everyone just thinks she's great.
And I'm assuming these are the Bourbons, not the Lorraines.
Yes.
Bourbon uncles, which, again, the Bourbons are eventually going to get their own. And her uncles would be, like, one of them is the grandfather of Henry of Navarre. And, like, these are very impressive dudes in their own right.
Yeah. No, every male relative she has is like got some sort of job title. So this is all at the same time as we discussed in the Margaret Tudor episode. So King James V of Scotland he's looking for a wife, and for Catholic alliance reasons, he was like, it would be great if I got a wife who was French royalty. Just to really, so France, can you explain France and Scotland's? Is it just they both hated England? Why are they allied so strongly?
Because they both hate England. Like, honestly, 90% of anything anybody does at this point is because they hate either England or Spain. So they got along because they were when you're at war with somebody, it's usually best to be at war with somebody on the opposite side of them so that their attention's split and then have different skill sets. So the Scottish are very, very good at land wars. Like that is their thing. So much so that the Romans are like, yeah, we're not going over this line. This is not our problem. Like that's their reputation from the beginning of time. They're sea people, but they're not. The English were Navy. Like that was the English kind of became the Navy people. Scotland's very, 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 very good at land wars because they're more like guerrilla fighters than the formal pitched battle thing.
Mm-hmm.
France had the Navy. France had, especially even at this time, like England was not the England that we know now of like the England of 100 years after this point where they had like this super strong Navy and the English oaks gave them dominance over the sea. They were getting there, but they weren't there yet. So France had the Navy and Scotland had the land war. And so tying together, they could get around England and kind of pincer move them was the dream fight against England.
And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go Network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for the Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back. And this is such a crucial part of the Mary Queen of Scots situation, is the Scotland-France connection. So James shows up, and this is James, who is the son of Margaret Tudor. So this is the psychologically damaged person who had been torn back and forth between his evil stepfather who kept kidnapping him. He hates Henry VIII, that guy. Anyway, he had all these, I talked about this in the Margaret Tudor episode, but he had a lot of illegitimate children, but he needed some legitimate children. So he came in and he met, so there's the three besties. You've got the two princesses, Marguerite and Madeleine, and then Marie de Guise is there, who's their bestie. So he, I think, I wrote this down, so I'm sure I read it somewhere. He was like, oh my God, you walk in the room, you're like, ooh, that one. Elizabeth Debicki, but they're like, oh no, she's not actually one of the princesses. You need to choose one of the other two. But he was he noticed her because everybody did. And so they're like, maybe you want to marry this princess, Marguerite, who is not actively dying of tuberculosis. And he's like, no, I choose Princess Madeleine, the one who is sickly and we've talked about tuberculosis weirdly a lot lately on this podcast, but could you just remind everybody about tuberculosis and how it manifests?
Yes. Actually, if you're on TikTok and you follow John Green, he's doing a very amazing job of explaining how all of human history is about tuberculosis. Mostly European history, but still lots of human history is about the influence of tuberculosis and how it ruins things. But tuberculosis is a disease that's kind of relapsing remitting, which means that it kind of starts and it's really, really bad, and then it goes away, and then it acts up again and goes away. And basically each time
like you have it for years. Like it's
you have it, it can kill you very quickly, especially if you have a weakened immune system. But if you have a strong immune system, that means you waste away over possibly even decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it kills every time it relapses, it kills part of your lung. And so each time it's done and it goes away, you have less lung than you did before. So that's why, like in America, in the Old West, they were called lungers. There were people that were just losing their ability to breathe. They breathe very heavy. So, but when you don't have enough oxygen, like when the bottom of your lungs that starts dying pretty fast is where a lot of the oxygen comes from, the air exchange. So basically you start choking to death very, very, very slowly over a very long period of time, or shorter, depending on how good your immune system is and how good you are coping with the lack of oxygen.
So the thing with Princess Madeline is, so as you just described, like, so she had tuberculosis, but
one more thing.
Yes, please.
Sorry. It's only transmissible like in the very early stages.
Mm.
Like even though it acts up again, you aren't contagious. So it's only transmissible during parts of it. So you can be married to someone who actively is having a bout, and you may not even get sick.
Exactly. So when he's trying to decide who to marry, like the concern with Princess Madeleine was less like she has tuberculosis. Well, okay.
And you will get it too.
Yeah. So that wasn't a concern. The concern was like, firstly, it's like, is this teenage girl going to be able to like have, 12 of your children when she like is ill? But also, is she going to like actively survive the like boat trip to Scotland?
And Scotland itself, because it's not a very good climate for if you have a lung disease.
It's a cold,
it's very moist,
damp
and
climate.
very cold.
Yeah. Which is interesting because so after I posted the Margaret Tudor episode, like the one most famous portrait of Margaret Tudor is her, and she's got this little marmoset, like monkey creature with her. And I was like,
poor thing.
I know. So then I Googled, I was like, are marmosets okay pets? And what I read was basically like the UK, whatever, animal control was like, no, these are not good pets. But they also said like, if you're going to have a marmoset as a pet, like it needs to live in like a warm tropical climate. So I'm just like, Scotland? Like the marmoset that's in that portrait, how long did that marmoset live? I don't know. So anyway, tuberculosis-ridden princesses like marmosets don't thrive in Scotland. So anyway, James chose Madeline because he chose her. And then she did not do well on the sea voyage. She fell ill shortly after arriving in Scotland and died 6 months later. So James needed another bride, and he was like, what about her tall friend? So meanwhile, Princess Marguerite, the other like princess, had already been married to somebody else. But unfortunately for James, Marie had been married to somebody already. Obviously, because we know she's the mother of Mary, Queen of Scots, this marriage is not going to last. Anyway, so who she married was a man called Louis d'Orleans, or Louis II d'Orleans. Do you know anything about him? Like he's a duke, or
he dies real fast. So no, he himself no. But the Duc de Longueville is like the Duc de Longueville comes up, like that title comes up a lot, mm-hmm. And Orleans. The Orleans family also comes up a lot in France. They are, oh, gracious. You're asking me all of the good stuff, and I should have looked up this first.
No, but this is fun. Like, I mean, I think knowing everything that we've said so far about Marie de Guise, how ambitious her family is, it's like we know that the guy she married was like the top guy. Like, there was no other more eligible husband for her to potentially marry than this guy. Like, he's like, they're like, it's French nobility. It's a duke. Duc d'Orléans. The Duc d'Orléans is usually a title granted to the King of France's brother, because that's how influential this family comes over time. Yeah.
At this point, it's just a regular old peerage. Like it's the House of Valois Orleans. So they're like really closely related to the King and Queen.
Yeah. So again, it's like Marie, this is as close as she could get to marrying the king, basically. He was also only 5 years older than her, which for this podcast and this discussion is great. That age gap, you love to see it. Anyway, so I mean, we obviously don't know like what was the marriage like, but what I will say is that she was married when she was about 19 years old. He died 2 years later, and she kept his final letter to her and carried it around with her for the rest of her life, which indicates some affection. And in fact, you can visit this letter and some of her other correspondence at the National Library of Scotland. And I will note that her handwriting is beautiful, but of course it is, because she was just sort of like, I don't know, she was just an impressive person to everybody. Like the fact that she got the attention of, anyway, of course her handwriting is like beautiful. So anyway, so
she was raised by nuns.
You know what? She wrote a lot of lines. Yeah. So she's now 21, pregnant, a widow, and she had already had one son with her husband. So her first son was called Francis, and then her second son was named Louis after his dead father, but then Louis died in infancy. And she gave birth just a few months after her husband's death. So she is now, she has one alive son, one dead son. She's 21, pregnant, a widow.
And the alive son becomes a duke himself, like the Duke de Longueville.
Yeah, he does very well for himself, which is interesting. So that son is gonna, in a few years, be the half brother of Mary Queen of Scots.
Right, and he was also raised by Antoinette. So like he becomes part of the whole de Guise conspiracy.
Yeah, no, he's involved. So
but then he dies.
Any man in the de Guise family is going to be part of the de Guise conspiracy. So anyway, so every eligible bachelor in France and other countries were basically flinging themselves at her family, being like, please let us be the next husband of this woman. She is so tall and cool and interesting. Her handwriting is beautiful. Like, oh my God, please.
Has all the right family. All of it.
Yeah. And I mean, her family is only, I'm assuming, getting more and more powerful as years go by.
No, by this point, like she has at least a couple bishops, 2 dukes.
Yeah.
Like it's getting scary powerful.
And then also the fact that she's 21, she's had 2 successful pregnancies. Like people know she's like young, she's fertile. Like we can have, like she's like, her job is to have somebody's children, right? So anyway, so of the eligible bachelors of Europe who are Catholic, James V, King of Scotland, is one of them. And so his options, like he really wanted to marry someone else French because the whole Scotland-France alliance situation. But the 2 princesses, well, Madeleine dead, Marguerite already married, and she's the next best thing to princess. But another king was interested in marrying Marie de Guise, and that king was Henry VIII. So,
and we all know how much he likes being turned down.
So just to put, it's Henry VIII was often between wives, right? So, but this situation was this was all happening. So Anne Boleyn has been beheaded. Jane Seymour has died, but Anne of Cleves has not happened yet. So it's between Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves, if you're familiar with the musical Six. And if you will recall, Henry VIII and James V of Scotland hate each other. They have a long-standing rivalry for various reasons, including how Henry VIII conspired with his stepfather to have James kidnapped as a teenager. So these 2 men...
Well, and Mary's not just hot and tall and hot. She's also proven fertile.
Yeah, and King Henry VIII, we know he wants those sons.
And both of them are like, nope, need that.
Yeah. Well, and also I think the tallness speaks to her overall like health, and maybe ability to. And her mother had 12 children. Like it's just this, like she's taking off all the boxes. So these 2 kings, these become the kind of main contenders, and who, not that Henry's ever really a contender, but these are the 2 guys who are the most serious about pursuing her. So basically, she was not going to let it be Henry VIII. Well, partially because this is after Anne Boleyn. So like he's not Catholic anymore. So like her family was not going to let her marry a not Catholic king. So apparently Henry VIII said something along the lines of like, I want a big, I like a big girl. I want a tall wife. And she said, quote, I may be a big woman, but I have a very little neck, which was about how Henry had very famously beheaded Anne Boleyn. Anyway, so Marie was so important. And again, this isn't like, I don't want to make anyone think like she was going to decide for herself. Like the French king was going to choose her husband. Like that's the level of importance that this person is at.
But he wasn't going to completely ignore her family's wishes though either.
Oh, exactly.
It's also really important to know in the political climate of France that this is not Louis XIV, the Sun King. This is political dude who has to negotiate with all of the dukes around him to have enough money to do what he needs to do. So, like, the whole absolute power thing was a reaction to how powerful the dukes had been for the last several hundred years. And this is that several hundred years where the dukes are extremely powerful.
And the most powerful dukes are the de Guises at this point, I would assume.
They're getting there. They're the highest ranked nobles of the non-royal family.
Yeah.
And they're just like getting title after title after title.
So the French king also notably hates Henry VIII, which
because who wouldn't?
Who doesn't? Anyway, so he was like, okay, I choose James. And so Marie de Guise was engaged to be married to James, the King of Scotland. She was not happy about this because she didn't want to leave France to go to Scotland. And again, I really want to emphasize, I love Scotland. I have visited Scotland. I have family who lives in Scotland. My ancestors are from Scotland, but it's like Scotland.
My great-grandfather was Scotland.
all love to Scotland.
Love.
But Scotland circa 15, what is this? I don't know. 40. If you're like
to live with John Knox.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, it's cold. It's like, didn't we have, in the Margaret Tudor episode, there was the Duke of Albany who was in France and they're like, can you come to Scotland and be the regent? And he was like, no, why would I do that?
It was a backwater.
Yeah.
I mean, it was strategically important for their war against finally getting rid of England, but it was also a backwater. It wasn't considered civilization.
Yeah.
And it's very far away.
And it was cold and damp. And she'd been living like in the ultimate best homes in France, you know. So anyway, she didn't want to leave France because why would she?
Her first marriage was at the Louvre.
Yeah. She's anyway, so she doesn't want to leave France for various reasons, like most of them obvious. But part of this also is like her son was in France and she wasn't allowed to bring him to Scotland. So she's going to be separated from her like baby son, who was like the son of her like dead husband. All of her family and friends were in France, but she didn't get a veto in this scenario. So all the best that her family could do for her was to get the best possible prenup. And her uncles / maybe at this point brothers, her male relatives stepped in and they did a great job landing her as good a deal as if she'd literally been a princess. Like she got the best possible paperwork for this marriage, including a clause that if James died before her, she'd get to keep lots of land in Scotland. Like she wouldn't just be kicked out. And so she heads to Scotland. And I think this is a nice moment for her new mother-in-law, Margaret Tudor, who's just like, oh my God, finally, someone cool.
Someone I can have a conversation with.
Oh my gosh. Like, we both hate Henry VIII. We both hate Scotland. Neither of us wants to be here. And they hit it off right away. Like, just...
They're both smart.
They're both so smart. They're both so capable. They're both, I just feel like historically, this is true. Like the two of them like got along. And they were both just didn't want to be in it. This was not a good place to be a cool woman who was also very smart.
Yeah. Lairds don't like that so much.
No, the asshole Scottish lords were not welcoming to Marie de Guise. Because they hated women. So can we talk about John Knox for a minute?
I knew you were going to do this to me.
I'm not going to make you explain John Knox, but like I believe he's on the scene at this point. So John Knox was a preacher who, well, I don't know what
He was a Protestant.
He was
a Calvinist.
He was like the most Protestant. Like
he was okay. So there's a lot of like variation in Protestantism, and I have a lot of church history because I was raised extremely conservative sect Protestant on two sides, and so one side of my family was Lutheran, and so Lutheranism is like Catholics got it. Catholics they were okay at first, and then they kind of started making mistakes. It's kind of like the where Lutheran comes in, and so there's like big bands of Lutheranism that go all the way to the modern evangelical version of Lutheranism, and then the old conservative version of Lutheranism, which is like basically Catholic without the Stations of the Cross, with priests being able to marry, like and a fundamental understanding of person-based faith as opposed to actions. But like one side of my family was like convinced I was going to hell because I wasn't catechized in Lutheran church. So like Lutheranism is like basically Catholic light. And I know I'm going to get like actual Lutherans would fight me for that, but you know, it is what it is, especially during this period, because it wasn't that far away from the Reformation. And then there was Henry VIII, and Henry VIII's version of Protestantism is, I get all of that stuff that the Catholics have, and we'll figure out a religion along the way. But that was like so political.
It's like his version was kind of like, it's like Catholic, but instead of the Pope, there's me. That's the only difference.
And then there was this guy called John Calvin who came along, and he's like, nope, everything about this is wrong. I'm going all the way back. And he started rebuilding a religion around the old churches, the old churches of the Bible. So like what Paul was talking about in the New Testament. And so his churches are very, like, when you think of they're very, 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 very conservative, and they're puritanistic. They're very insular, very closed communities. And so John Knox looks at all of these options and goes, Calvin, that's the one. I'm going to bring super closed, very, very strict, not Catholic things to Scotland.
So I was just double checking some dates because I don't want to put him on the scene too early. But Marie de Guise became Queen of Scotland in 1538, and John Knox really takes off about 8 years later. So he's there.
Okay.
He's there, but he's not super active at this point.
He's still figuring out all of his stuff. So she came when?
1538.
1538. So yeah, it's 1556 when Beaton dies.
So John Knox is going to be, this is kind of, I guess, a foreshadowing. He's, as Mary Queen of Scots grows up, he's getting more powerful. But like, it's not just, he didn't come on the scene and like suddenly everybody changed their mind. It's like people were primed and ready to follow him.
Yep, he was still Catholic at the time.
Yeah.
But he was like, but is Catholic the right thing?
Yeah.
So he's like figuring out his own stuff. But that there were people around that were talking about the Reformed churches, that they were trying to figure out their own version of the Reformation. Were they going to be Protestant? Because they weren't going to be Anglican.
Yeah.
It was not going to happen. But is it Lutheranism? Is it something else? They were starting to question the influence of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is very, very far away from Scotland.
And this is the thing. So this is like, I think the crucial part of this at this point for this story is Marie de Guise, super Catholic. Her family, super Catholic.
So Catholic.
Like her,
and like buddies with the Pope kind of Catholic.
Yeah, yeah. Like she's like, there's no suggestion that she's ever going to convert.
2 of her siblings were cardinals.
Yeah, no, she like,
which is the highest you can get without being Pope.
Could not be the more Catholic. And so just imagining her arriving in Scotland, and that's who she is. And at this point, like, Scotland hasn't settled, but it's kind of like, what's our religion going to be? So just bear in mind that like, that's where she's coming from. And Scotland is just kind of like, let's see where we're going to go with this vis-a-vis religion. So
even when they were Catholic, they were not that Catholic.
No, exactly. No. So she came on the scene, and again, she doesn't really fit in, but she's like resilient. She's got skills. She's got her mother-in-law's cool. Anyway, so she had 2 sons pretty early on in her marriage. They were named James and Robert, but then they both died in infancy. They actually both died on the same day. So she came there in 1538, like had a baby, had another baby, and then in 1541, one of her sons was 8 days old. The other one wasn't quite a year old yet, and they both died on the same day. So she now had experienced 3 infant deaths. She was separated from her like one alive son who is back in France. They exchange letters all the time, her son in France. And again, those are some of the letters that we have of hers that are in the museum. And then 1 year later, Marie had a daughter who she named Mary after herself. So we haven't had this in a while on the podcast, but if you do have the bingo card at home, names daughter after self is one of the squares. So she's Marie de Guise. She calls her daughter Mary. I'm going to guess she probably pronounced it Marie. And then 6 days later, her husband died.
And all hell broke loose.
And this is how Mary, who is Mary Queen of Scots, became Mary Queen of Scots, aged 6 days. And this is, so a whole new thing is starting up, which is Marie de Guise is now a widow again. And the new Queen of Scots is a girl who is also a baby.
Which the Lairds love. Love having a queen being raised by a queen.
Couldn't be happier about it. Couldn't be happier about, we're being extremely sarcastic, to be clear. Because the asshole Scottish lords, they hate women. Anyway, so we've got this little baby 6-day-old queen. So, meanwhile, Henry VIII is still the King of England. Don't worry, he wasn't like, oh, I'll marry this baby. No. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to arrange a marriage between baby Mary Queen of Scots and his son, Edward. But Henry VIII was again single as well. So this is the point. So Catherine Howard had been executed, but this is before he married Catherine Parr. So he was again between wives. And he was like, what if we do like a 2-for-1 deal? What if my son Edward marries this 6-day-old baby, and then I, Henry VIII, will marry Marie de Guise, who's tall and beautiful, and we'll just be like a Renaissance Brady Bunch.
And the regent at the time goes, sure, let's do it.
That is not what happened.
No.
So Marie is now Dowager Queen of Scots, and she's in a situation like her de Guise male relatives did not come with her to Scotland because no one wanted to go to Scotland.
Because they were too important for that.
They were too important for that, and also it's cold there. So she's just like, this is where she steps into her own independent power. And she was just like, no, I'm not going to marry you, Henry VIII. Fuck off. No. And I'm also not going to engage my daughter to your son. Like, no, this is not a thing that is going to happen. Henry VIII, as we know, deals really well with being told no. And so he basically went to war against Scotland to try and force Marie to let her baby daughter marry his son.
Okay, I am going to correct you.
Please.
The regent at the time said yes.
Oh, the regent in Scotland?
The regent of Mary, the cousin that, again, I have weird knowledge of Scotland, but it is not of Marie de Guise. No, this is the rough wooing, which means, because he was super pro-England.
The guy who was the regent was pro-England? Okay, wait. So who is this? Who is this regent? Is this James Hamilton?
Give me 2 seconds.
No, I have a note here saying that
you were...
No, I have a regent was put in place to run the country for her. Yeah. The guy chosen was named James Hamilton, and Marie hated him. That's my notes.
Yeah, and he was super pro-England. He went down and he agreed to it. He brought it back, and this is the one time the Lairds and Mary got agree. Marie agreed. They're like, no, this is not happening, and that's why Henry's like, well, but you agreed to it, and they're like, did we though?
And then so this is.
We hate this dude.
No, so this becomes like a huge Catholic Scotland, Protestant England war, and it's called the War of the Rough Wooing, which is a great name of a war. And it's all about Henry VIII wanting to marry his son to Marie's daughter.
And it's also, it wasn't named that at the time.
Oh, it wasn't?
It has been named that since England took over Scotland, and like they were downplaying how much like a genocide this was.
Oh,
like
okay.
They're like, oh, it's the rough wooing. Like it's not a war. It's a rough wooing.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, this is one of the many times where they went back and they renamed something to just make it sound a little bit better for what England was doing.
Okay, so the War of the Rough Wooing, which is a good name because retroactively someone gave it that name to make it sound cute, but in fact was a genocidal war. Yeah, so the regent for little baby Mary was a guy named James Hamilton. Marie hated him. She attempted a coup to have him removed, but was unsuccessful this time. I have a note here saying that she got her own special like fashion armor and a specially painted spear. I don't think she was 100% not in the battles, but she was just being like, I don't know, here's my war outfit. Look at me, I'm amazing. She did go out to take a peek at the battle, but her group of like looky-loos got too close. And 16 of her armed guards were killed. So not a great choice she made there.
Yeah.
Anyway, but she was so grateful to the guards who protected her that day. She gave a reward of 1 month's wages to one particular guy who helped her out a lot. And my notes here, if this was a romance novel, they would have fallen in love. But that is not what happens because she was not here for love affairs. That's not what she's into. She's done that. She's busy. What was she busy doing? Arranging the engagement of her baby daughter to Prince Francis, the Dauphin, the heir to the throne in France. So she wants to just like really cement this French-Scotland partnership. But also because she was effectively a princess. She married a king. So like, of course, her daughter, who is a queen, is going to marry someone who's going to become a king. Francis, the Dauphin, was a similar age, also a baby. And his parents, well, his mother was Catherine de Medici, who we're going to talk about in another whole series of podcasts. So
I'm holding back.
Lana will be there for these episodes as well. So just know.
And there will be a lot more de Guise content in that one too.
See, it's important that we're explaining about the de Guises here because like anything France in this era, there's de Guises are there. So anyway, but this happened. Like this marriage was arranged. And so little Mary, who was probably at this point not a baby, probably a toddler, was sent off to France to grow up among the de Guises and the French royal family. And so she grew up alongside the French royal family, but we'll talk about that later. So now Marie de Guise separated like her other child now in France. She's still in Scotland, but kind of like... No, go ahead.
When she went to drop off the baby, that's when Francis died. When she dropped off Mary and her older son was sick.
Oh, no.
And so she was there when her other son died.
Ugh.
And helped him through his final illness. So she basically dropped off one kid to get married to the king of France, the future king of France, and helped the other one die and then went back home.
Oh my God, this woman's life.
So that's context to face what's coming next.
Great point. I think we can't not consider her ongoing trauma from all this child death, separating from her children, and then having to go back to Scotland. So it reminds me of in the Margaret Tudor saga, where she's just like, okay, I'm in Scotland, fuck everyone. Like, I have no fucks to give. I'm here by myself. You're all assholes. Like, let's go.
You're really bad at this. You're all really, really bad at this getting along thing.
Yeah. And she's just like Margaret Tudor. She's also just like so smart, so capable. And everyone's like, a woman? I don't think so. And she's just like, oh, fuck everybody. So it's like, and then again, this motif will recur later this season as well. So we're going to end things there. Next week, we'll be back with part 2 of Marie de Guise and what she got up to. And I have a new segment I want to do in this podcast. I had hoped that things would work out like this because we're taking sort of a leisurely pace this season. You know, we have the Mary Queen of Scots episodes and we have the super specials in between. And that really leaves people time to send me some feedback. And I have some feedback that I want to read because, first of all, in the Margaret Tudor episode, I I think I asked the question about England and Scotland and them always being at war. And Rachel Foxton on Twitter sent me some messages that are interesting context I want to share with you. So Rachel says, to answer the question you asked in the last episode, yes, England and Scotland were basically on again, off again at war until the Jacobite Rising. It was the same with England and Wales until Henry Tudor, basically just England being greedy and wanting to conquer. There's still some underlying tensions, especially when you think about what England took away from Scotland and Wales and Cornwall, including language. It's unsurprising really that the question of independence is raised every few years. But there has been a resurgence in Scottish, Welsh, and Cornish people reclaiming their heritage. The native languages are being learnt and spoken, events revived, and the historical bias is no longer in favor of England. I'm quite proud to be a part of that. And that was Rachel, who is on Twitter at 52Foxton, and it's 5 and 2 are spelled out like words. And then also, I've been messaging back and forth with a creator who I first encountered on Instagram, and she's also on YouTube. Her name is EKsplaine. Well, her name is EK, and her account is EKsplaine. And she posts these incredible reels on Instagram. After every Mary Queen of Scots episode, I have been sharing some of them, but you should follow her anyway, because she did her dissertation on Margaret Tudor, Queen of Scots, and she's just, I don't know, in like a 10 to 15 second reel, just like she nails it. Anyway, so you should follow her on Instagram at EKsplaine, and here's a message that she sent me, contextualizing the whole thing with Margaret Tudor that we talked about in those episodes about how there's allegedly something in James's will saying that if she got married, she wouldn't be the regent anymore. And here's what EK told me about it. So this is long, but it's good. So it is generally assumed, and again, I'm reading from what EK had to say. It is generally assumed based on the actions of her contemporaries that James IV specified Margaret remaining unmarried as a condition of her regency and guardianship of her son. This assumption is natural and taken as rote by almost every historian since. But it was not without question. A Victorian scholar named Mary Ann Everett Green questioned it, but this question has rarely followed up, and merits little mention in both scholarly and popular historiography. Green argues that while we are told by historians that James's will explicitly made her regency contingent on remaining unmarried, none of her contemporaries that I know of, that's EK, referred to it this way. Green argues, and this is backed up by the records of the Regency government, that it was in fact legal custom that excluded Margaret from the role. In Scotland, when a widow with children remarried, her right to raise her children as she saw fit became limited, presumably because her new husband was now considered the head of the family. This Council of Scotland, this is me, the asshole Scottish lords, this is EK again, on September 18th, 1514, wrote that Margaret lost the office of tutrix because she has contracted marriage, and oh my gosh, this is written in Old Scots, a language I do not speak. Basically what it says is, because she has contracted marriage through which the office of tutor ceased in her conforming to the laws of the realm. So the laws of the realm, not James's will, which we don't have a copy of. The asshole lords, every time I say asshole, that's me, that's not EK. The asshole lords would later argue that the realm of Scotland was not something that could be bequeathed in any will, even that of a king. But this was something Margaret, of course, refused to accept. Now, EK says, I've never seen a copy of James's will. I've never seen anyone, not Margaret's contemporaries, not historians in the last 500 years, quote directly from it or reference any of its particulars. We simply hear, he named her regent on the condition she remain unmarried. But could Margaret have been right? It's somewhat moot, but if she was right, James's faith in his young wife is further demonstrated. On the one hand, he might not have felt the need to mention remarriage at all, because he knew the law would do so for him. But what if he didn't specify it because he trusted her? Trusted her to do right by their son, by his kingdom, by the dynasty that had emerged from the ashes of the wars of independence. Trusted that she would make the right call regarding any marriage, or hoped that she, and this is more likely, would see the benefit in remaining unmarried. It might seem as if she threw that faith away, and hindsight certainly tells us Archibald Douglas, 6th Earl of Angus, was the wrong call, to put it lightly. But EK says, she concurs with my interpretation that Margaret's remarriage resulted partly from a need to shore up support and attach herself to a figure with authority and resources. This is EK. I really want to clarify when I say like my and I, like this is EK. Quote, my love of Margaret Tudor stems from her flaws and her failures. She sought to further and preserve her interests, to keep herself and her son safe, and maintain status and a role in government. In this endeavor, she succeeded and failed almost in equal measure, but she never gave up and seemed so rarely to doubt herself and her abilities. One aspect of her career exemplifies this, I feel. When, in 1514, she was deposed after her remarriage, she simply did not listen. She planned a parliament for the November in Johnstone, attendance of which the asshole lords of the council had to explicitly prohibit, showing that Margaret still enjoyed support from at least a small section of Scottish nobility. And she refused to hand over the Great Seal for as long as she could, to the point the council debated writing to whosoever goldsmith it shall be seen expedient to have a new one made. Amazing. Margaret always swung for the fences, even when the odds were against her. I always say that it's one type of courage to risk it all for success, but it's quite another to risk it all for failure. Anyway, so those messages are for EK. And again, I can't recommend enough you follow her on Instagram at EKsplaine. And then she's also on YouTube at EKsplaine. I'll put those links in the show notes. So I'm going to close this episode with the regular reminders that I like to always remind you all of. Actually, in one special bonus reminder, if you're listening to this the day that it first came out, March 29th, 2023, I've been doing a thing so I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And so for people who pledge at least $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all the episodes. If you pledge at least $2 a month, you get the early access to episodes, and you also get access to polls. $5 or more a month, you get access to the polls, the early ad-free access, and also bonus episodes of Vulgar Peace Theater. And so this asshole. Anyway, so for the people at the $2 and $5 levels, these past couple of weeks, I've been doing a March Madness on there. So I looked at the people who are the top scorers on this Fredegan Memorial Scandalicious scale. And we've been doing like a March Madness. So you like vote against who you think is the most tits out person. And it's been fun and just like a thing to do. So anyway, so if you want to join the Twitter, like if you join the Twitter today, we're just in the finals. So I'm recording this in advance, so I don't know who the finals are going to be. I'm saying at the point I'm recording this, Fredegan is doing very well. So has been, and Jenga also got a lot of votes. Anyway, so if you were thinking of joining the Patreon, today is a fun day to do it because then you get to vote in the finals. But also you're supporting the show right now by listening to it. Thank you. I love you. You can also support the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. There's a new thing on Spotify. Like you can give a rating of the podcast, just like a star rating, which is sweet and I appreciate it. But also in the podcast itself, like if you're listening to it in the Spotify app, there's a place where you can like leave a little comment. So you can do that too if you're listening on Spotify. Anyway, you can also support this show by buying Vulgar History merch, which is all at vulgarhistory.store, or you can always use code TITSOUT for free US shipping or TITSOUT10 for 10% off. Oh, and then I also have a little newsletter, which is not at all to do with women's history, but it's more just to do with what I'm interested, what I'm enjoying and thinking about. And that is at 3nicethings.substack.com if you want to follow me there too. Anyway, next week we're going to be back with the conclusion of the Marie de Guise saga. So until then, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth. Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.